when an entitled Karen decided to invade his backyard pool. Retired police officer Marcus Johnson didn't just stand by. He took matters into his own hands, and what happened next will leave you cheering. The sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood. Birds chirped, kids rode their bikes down the street, and the faint sound of laughter echoed from backyard barbecues. It was a perfect summer afternoon, and retired police officer Marcus Johnson enjoyed every second of it. After 25 years on the force, Marcus had earned his peace. His backyard oasis, a sparkling blue pool surrounded by lush greenery, was his sanctuary. It was where he went to unwind, reflect, and escape the chaos of the world. Marcus sat on a lounge chair, sipping iced tea and scrolling through his phone. His wife, Lisa, was inside preparing snacks, and their 2 teenage kids were out with friends. Life was good. But as Marcus leaned back and closed his eyes, the sound of a gate creaking open snapped him back to attention. He turned his head, expecting to see a neighbor or maybe a delivery person. Instead, he saw her, Karen. She was a middle-aged woman with a blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and an air of entitlement that could be felt from across the yard. She marched toward the pool like she owned the place, a towel draped over her arm and a bottle of sunscreen in hand. Marcus stood up, his instincts kicking in. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Karen barely glanced at him. "Oh, I'm just here to use the pool. It's such a hot day, and I figured since you're not using it, I might as well." Marcus blinked, trying to process what he'd just heard. "Ma'am, this is private property. You can't just walk into someone's backyard and use their pool." Karen waved him off. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just water. Besides, it's not like you're swimming right now." Marcus took a deep breath, his years of training helping him keep his cool. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Karen scoffed. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I live in this neighborhood, and I have every right to be here." The moment Karen stepped into Marcus's backyard, the atmosphere shifted. What had been a peaceful summer afternoon was now charged with tension. Marcus, a retired police officer with 25 years of experience, immediately recognized the situation for what it was: a blatant disregard for boundaries and a sense of entitlement that needed to be addressed. He stood up from his lounge chair, his tall, imposing frame casting a shadow as he approached her. His voice was calm but firm, the kind of tone that had commanded respect during his years on the force. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his eyes locked on Karen. Karen, unfazed, barely glanced at him as she set her towel down on one of the poolside chairs. "Oh, I'm just here to use the pool," she said as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It's such a hot day, and I figured since you're not using it, I might as well." Marcus blinked, trying to process her audacity. "Ma'am, this is private property. You can't just walk into someone's backyard and use their pool." Karen waved him off dismissively, her tone dripping with condescension. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just water. Besides, it's not like you're swimming right now." Marcus took a deep breath, his training kicking in. He knew that escalating the situation wouldn't help, but he also couldn't let her behavior slide. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said, his voice steady but firm. Karen scoffed, her hands on her hips as she turned to face him. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I live in this neighborhood, and I have every right to be here." Marcus crossed his arms, his patience wearing thin. "Ma'am, I don't care who you are or where you live. This is my property, and you're trespassing." Now I'm asking you nicely to leave before this escalates." Karen rolled her eyes and sat down on the chair, pulling out a bottle of sunscreen. "You're being ridiculous. I'm not hurting anyone. If you have a problem, call the police." Marcus couldn't help but smirk at the irony. "Lady, I am the police. Well, retired, but still, you're not supposed to be here." Karen ignored him, slathering sunscreen on her arms as if he weren't even there. Marcus shook his head, realizing that reasoning with her wasn't going to work. He pulled out his phone and started recording. "Just so we're clear," he said, holding up the phone, "you're trespassing on private property after being asked to leave. I'm giving you one last chance to walk away before I take further action." Karen looked up, finally noticing the camera. Her expression shifted from smug to irritated. "Put that thing away! You can't record me without my permission." "Actually, I can," Marcus replied, his tone calm but unwavering. "This is my property, and I have every right to document what's happening." Karen stood up, her face red with anger. "You're harassing me! I'm a taxpayer, and I deserve respect." Marcus kept the camera rolling, his voice steady. "Respect is earned, ma'am. And right now, you're not earning any." Karen snatched her towel and stormed toward the gate, but not without a final parting shot. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. This is discrimination." Marcus chuckled as she slammed the gate behind her. "Discrimination? Really?" He shook his head and stopped recording. He knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. As he sat back down, Marcus couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and amusement. He had dealt with all kinds of people during his career, but there was something uniquely infuriating about someone who felt entitled to what wasn't theirs. He knew he had handled the situation correctly, but he also knew that Karen's sense of entitlement wouldn't let her walk away quietly. Sure enough, within the hour, a police car pulled up to his house. Marcus greeted the officers at the door, ready to defend his actions. He handed over the video, confident that it would speak for itself. The confrontation with Karen had been a test of his patience and principles, but Marcus had passed with flying colors. He had stood his ground, defended his property, and refused to let entitlement win. And as he watched the officers drive away, he knew that whatever came next, he was ready for it. The calm had returned to his backyard, but Marcus knew better than to let his guard down. Some battles were worth fighting, and this was one of them. After Karen storms out of Marcus's backyard, slamming the gate behind her, Marcus knows the confrontation isn't over. He's dealt with enough entitled individuals during his 25 years on the police force to recognize when someone isn't going to let things go. Sure enough, within the hour, a police car pulls up to his house. 2 officers step out, and Marcus greets them at the door. One of them, Officer Ramirez, a younger cop who clearly recognizes Marcus, looks apologetic as he explains why they're there. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Johnson," Ramirez says. "We got a call about a disturbance here. A woman claims she was harassed and discriminated against while trying to use your pool." Marcus isn't surprised. He nods calmly and hands over his phone, which contains the video he recorded during the encounter. "I figured she'd try something like this. I recorded the whole thing. She trespassed on my property, refused to leave when I asked her to, and then threatened to sue me. The video should clear things up." The officers watch the footage, their expressions shifting from professional neutrality to mild amusement as they see Karen's entitled behavior unfold. In the video, Marcus remains calm and composed, while Karen is visibly agitated. dismissing his requests for her to leave and even claiming she has a right to be there because she's a taxpayer. The video ends with her storming off, shouting about discrimination. When the video finishes, Officer Ramirez hands the phone back to Marcos. "Well, that's pretty cut and dry. You're not in any trouble, Mr. Johnson. We'll have a word with her and make sure she understands the consequences of trespassing." Marcus thanks the officers and watches as they drive off. He knows Karen isn't the type to back down easily, but he's prepared for whatever comes next. He's dealt with far worse during his career, and he's not about to let someone like Karen disrupt his hard-earned peace. Later that evening, Marcus decided to upload the video to social media. He doesn't do it out of spite. He simply wants to document what happened in case Karen tries to escalate things further. But what happens next takes him by surprise. The video goes viral overnight. People from all over the country are sharing it, commenting on Karen's audacity and praising Marcus for handling the situation with such grace and authority. Memes start popping up, with captions like, "When Karen meets karma," and "Pool Patrol, justice served." News outlets pick up the story, and Marcus finds himself doing interviews about the importance of respecting boundaries and standing up to entitlement. Karen, meanwhile, becomes the internet's latest villain. Her attempts to play the victim backfire spectacularly, and the backlash is swift and merciless. She eventually drops her threats of legal action and retreats from the spotlight, hoping the world will forget her name. For Marcus, the experience is a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing can have a bigger impact than you expect. He didn't set out to become a viral sensation or a symbol of standing up to injustice, but he's glad his story has inspired others to hold their ground against entitlement. As he sits by his pool that evening, enjoying the quiet and the gentle ripple of the water, Marcus smiles. Life is good again, and if anyone else tries to invade his sanctuary, he'll be ready. After all, some battles are worth fighting, even if they start with a Karen and a bottle of sunscreen. The morning after the confrontation, Marcus Johnson woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. He groaned, rubbing his eyes as he reached for it. The screen was flooded with notifications, text messages, social media alerts, and missed calls. Confused, he unlocked his phone and opened one of the notifications. It was a tag from a friend on social media. When he clicked on it, he was taken to a post that had already garnered thousands of likes and shares. It was the video he had uploaded the night before, the one of Karen trespassing in his backyard and refusing to leave. Marcus sat up in bed, scrolling through the comments. People were calling him a hero, praising him for standing up to entitlement, and sharing their own stories of dealing with Karens in their lives. The video had gone viral overnight, and it was spreading like wildfire. News outlets had picked it up, and hashtags like #Poolgate and #Justice for Marcus were trending. He couldn't believe it. What he had intended as a simple documentation of the incident had turned into a full-blown internet sensation. As the day went on, the attention only grew. Reporters started calling, asking for interviews. Local news stations wanted to feature his story, and national outlets were reaching out as well. Marcus, ever the humble man, was hesitant at first. He hadn't done anything extraordinary in his mind. He had simply stood his ground and defended his property. But Lisa, his wife, encouraged him to speak out. "This isn't just about you anymore," she said. "People are inspired by what you did. They need to hear your story." Reluctantly, Marcus agreed. He did a few interviews explaining what had happened and why he had handled the situation the way he did. He talked about his years on the police force, where he had seen firsthand the importance of respecting boundaries and standing up for what's right. He emphasized that this wasn't about Karen as an individual, but about a broader culture of entitlement that needed to be addressed. "People think they can do whatever they want without consequences," he said in one interview. "But the truth is, actions have consequences, and sometimes you have to be the one to enforce them." The response to his interviews was overwhelmingly positive. People praised his calm demeanor, his sense of justice, and his willingness to speak truth to power. Memes and fan art started popping up online, with Marcos depicted as a superhero defending his pool from the clutches of entitlement. One popular meme showed him standing by the pool with the caption, "Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear flip-flops." Meanwhile, Karen was facing the brunt of the internet's wrath. Her attempts to play the victim had backfired spectacularly. She had gone to the police, claiming she had been harassed and discriminated against, but the video evidence made it clear who was in the wrong. When the footage went viral, her name and face were everywhere. People dug into her past, uncovering other instances where she had displayed similar behavior. She became the poster child for entitlement, and the backlash was swift and merciless. Karen tried to fight back, giving interviews of her own and claiming that Marcos had overreacted. "It's just a pool," she said in one particularly tone-deaf interview. "I wasn't hurting anyone. He's the one who made a big deal out of nothing." But her words only fueled the fire. Social media users roasted her for her lack of self-awareness, and the hashtag number #JustAPool started trending in response. As the days turned into weeks, the attention began to die down. Karen, realizing she was fighting a losing battle, dropped her threats of legal action and then retreated from the public eye. She deleted her social media accounts and went into hiding, hoping the world would forget her name. For Marcus, life slowly returned to normal. The reporters stopped calling, the memes stopped flooding his notifications, and the quiet rhythm of his retirement resumed. But the impact of what had happened lingered. Marcus's story struck a chord with people, and it continued to inspire conversations about entitlement, boundaries, and accountability. He received letters and messages from people all over the country, thanking him for standing up to Karen and sharing their own experiences. Some even sent him gifts, pool floats, sunscreen, and even a custom-made sign that read, "Private property, no Karens allowed." For Marcus, the whole experience was a reminder of the power of standing up for what's right. He hadn't set out to become a viral sensation or a symbol of justice, but he was glad his story had resonated with so many people. It reinforced his belief that small acts of courage could have a big impact, and that sometimes all it took was one person to say, "Enough is enough." As he sat by his pool one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the lessons he had learned, the people he had inspired, and the quiet strength it had taken to stand his ground. He thought about Karen, too, and hoped that maybe, just maybe, she had learned something from the experience. Life was good again. The pool was his sanctuary once more, a place of peace and reflection. And if anyone else tried to invade that peace, Marcus would be ready. After all, some battles were worth fighting, even if they started with a Karen and a bottle of sunscreen.